For more than half a millennium, the shadow of the Roman legions stretched over the known world. Their supremacy on the battlefields was not only the result of iron discipline or superior strategic mastery, it also rested on a mechanical precision, an ability to inflict death at distance with a regularity that few ancient civilizations were able to match. At the heart of this technological arsenal stood a singular machine. It did not possess the thunderous roar of the onagers, nor the sinister hiss of volleys of arrows. It struck with a sudden brutality, silent, almost invisible. Its name is synonymous with Roman engineering power, the ballista. Imagine the scene for a moment. An iron bolt weighing several kilograms propelled at speeds exceeding 100 km/h. At that velocity, wooden shields burst apart. Bronze or iron armor was pierced like parchment, and the projectile often continued its deadly course, mowing down the next ranks. The impact was so devastating that it did not cause only massive physical losses. It created panic, a visceral terror in the face of a death that struck without warning. And yet, despite its central role in the building of the empire, this jewel of ancient military engineering is today largely relegated to the margins of collective memory. To understand the ballista, one must go back beyond Rome. For if the Romans perfected it, standardized it, and deployed it on an industrial scale, its roots plunge deeply into the fertile soil of Hellenistic ingenuity. The history of mechanical artillery begins modestly in the 5th century before Jesus Christ, with a device known as the gastrophetes, literally the belly bow. It was a primitive crossbow so massive that it could not be drawn by the strength of the arms alone. The user had to press the weapon against his belly and use the weight of his body to lock the string. This system made it possible to launch projectiles with a power clearly superior to that of a traditional composite bow. But it remained an individual weapon, slow to reload, and poorly suited to the dynamic demands of the battlefield. The true technological revolution came not at Athens or at Sparta, but at Syracuse, the powerful city-state of Sicily. Around 400 BC, the tyrant Dionysius the Thirsters, aware of the constant threat of Carthage, made a radical and unprecedented decision in the ancient world. He gathered the best craftsmen and mathematicians of the Mediterranean and employed them as full-time military engineers. It was the birth of institutionalized military research and development. In these Syracusan workshops, freed from the constraints of daily production and encouraged to innovate, one idea transformed war forever: the power of torsion. Rather than relying on the bending of a wooden bow, these engineers designed machines powered by torsion springs, thick bundles of animal tendons or human hair twisted tight. These materials, when subjected to extreme torsion, store a phenomenal amount of potential energy. When released, they unleash that energy in an explosive way. Thus were born the first true catapults, a generic term at the time, and ballistae. These new weapons immediately changed the game. During the legendary siege of Tyre in 332 BC, Alexander the Great deployed his torsion engines massively. He did not use them only to hammer the walls, a task often long and arduous, but as precision artillery to clear the battlements of enemy archers and defenders. This suppressive fire allowed his siege towers to approach with relative impunity. Artillery was no longer a luxury reserved for prolonged siege. It became an essential tactical component of an army on campaign. However, despite their ingenuity, the Hellenistic kingdoms never fully integrated these machines into their fundamental military doctrine. They remained specialized tools, often deployed defensively as luxury auxiliaries. It took the brutal pragmatism and systematic spirit of Rome to recognize their true potential, a means of imposing control, precision, and terror on an industrial scale. When Rome began its aggressive expansion into the eastern Mediterranean, coming into conflict with powers like Macedonia, the Seleucids, and, once again, Syracuse. It was confronted with the reality of this Hellenistic technology. But unlike other peoples who might simply have copied existing designs, the Romans, with their almost pathological obsession with organization, discipline, and reproducibility, did far more. They broke these machines down, understood the mathematical principles, standardized them, adapted them to the rigors of field combat, and distributed them methodically throughout every legion of the empire. The turning point, the moment when Rome understood that it had to master this technology to survive and dominate, was the Siege of Syracuse in 214 BC, during the Second Punic War. The Roman forces commanded by the seasoned general Marcus Claudius Marcellus expected a quick victory. What they encountered was a technological nightmare. According to the accounts of Polybius, Plutarch, and Livy, the mathematical genius Archimedes himself supervised the defense of the city. He had designed a series of war machines that repelled Roman assaults with a precision that seemed supernatural to the superstitious legionary. Giant ballistae hurled bolts that destroyed approaching ships. Complex cranes, the famous claw of Archimedes, lifted galleys out of the water before letting them crash back down to break them. And more terrifying still, smaller throwing machines positioned behind specially designed loopholes aimed at individual soldiers with relentless accuracy. Marcellus was forced to abandon direct assaults and opt for a long blockade. Although Syracuse eventually fell in 212 BC, the lesson was searing for Rome. Artillery would never again be an occasional supplement. It became a central and indispensable element of the Roman war machine. At the height of the Republic, and under the Empire, this integration was total. In the time of Julius Caesar, a century and a half later, there did not exist a single Roman legion that did not have its own corps of specialized artillery engineers, the Ballistari, and a full allotment of around 60 artillery pieces ranging from portable scorpion models to enormous siege pieces. During the decisive campaigns in Gaul, notably at the siege of Alesia and Avaricum, Caesar employed his machines masterfully. They were not intended only to destroy Gallic fortifications. They were used to control the perimeter of his own gigantic siege lines, to break the breakout attempts of the besieged, and to keep the defenders under constant, precise fire. In this context, the ballista did not merely kill. It organized the chaos of the battlefield, imposing a logical and deadly structure on the fury of combat. It was a profoundly, intrinsically Roman approach. At first glance, an uninformed observer might confuse a Roman ballista with a colossal crossbow mounted on a sturdy wooden tripod. But this comparison is misleading. The ballista was infinitely more complex, a work of engineering art in which every detail was the result of millimetric calculation. It was not a matter of applying brute force, but of mastering an implacable mathematical precision. Every component of the ballista was sized according to rigorously established proportions codified by military engineers such as Vitruvius, the famous architect and engineer of the 1st century BC. In his treatise De Architectura, Vitruvius sets out the mathematical formulas that make it possible to calculate the optimal size of each part as a function of the desired caliber. For the Romans, such a weapon was not improvised in the field. It was designed like a lethal equation made of wood, metal, and controlled tension. The beating heart of the ballista lay in these two vertical modules, the capitula, which housed the weapon's engines, the torsion springs. These springs were made of highly resilient organic materials, most often animal tendons, generally from ox or deer, or, according to some sources, women's hair, particularly prized for its strength and elasticity. These bundles were meticulously prepared, often soaked in oil and vinegar to preserve their suppleness and prevent degradation. When the two launching arms inserted into the middle of these springs were drawn back using a powerful crank winch, the windlass, the tendon cords twisted further, compressing energy with latent explosive force. The accumulated tension was phenomenal, putting the very structure of the machine to the test. When the trigger was released, by a complex locking mechanism, this energy was released instantly. The launching arms pivoted violently forward, halted abruptly by sturdy stops, transferring all the kinetic energy to the projectile via the bowstring. Crucially, this was not a high-arching shot like that of a stone-throwing catapult or an onager. It was a taut trajectory. A straight, thunderbolt line, silent, without warning, and almost invariably deadly. At the center of the machine, between the two torsion engines, lay a long grooved slide, the canalis. That is where the projectile rested, generally a heavy iron bolt or a reinforced arrow that could measure up to a meter long. This guide ensured a perfectly straight and stable trajectory at the moment of firing. The most advanced models even included canalis reinforced with bronze or iron plates to minimize friction, increase durability, and prevent the slightest deviation. Everything was designed to maximize efficiency and precision. The diameter of the openings through which the springs passed, the length of the arms, the thickness of the frame, the firing angle. Every measurement followed strict proportional formulas. Operating a ballista was no small matter. It required a coordinated and highly trained team of at least 4 men. One was responsible for placing the projectile in the canalis. Another worked the winch with effort. A third, often the gun captain, meticulously checked the balance tension of the two springs. And the fourth was responsible for aiming and the firing signal. Firing a ballista was not simply pulling a trigger. It was a meticulous operation, a ballet of precise and repeated gestures. Moreover, the ballistari had to be true technicians, aware of the whims of their machines. Weather conditions directly affected performance. Humidity could slacken the organic tendons, reducing firing power. Conversely, extreme dry heat could make them shrink excessively, increasing tension to the point of risking the breaking of the launching arms or the frame. It was therefore common for these specialists to spend hours every day adjusting the tension of the springs, tuning their machine like a musician tunes a precious and dangerous instrument. A single miscalculation could result in a missed shot, or worse, the catastrophic destruction of the ballista itself. This is where Roman logistical genius came into its own. Thanks to standardized design and Vitruvian formulas, the parts of a ballista could be mass-produced in centralized workshops, manufactured, dismantled, transported easily in wagons, and assembled within a few hours anywhere in the empire, from the fog of Britain to the desert of Syria. Legions on campaign carried not only soldiers and provisions, but also crates containing bronze screws, spare tendon springs, numbered wooden parts, and technical assembly manuals. It was an unprecedented logistical power projection capability in history. Tactically, this mobility was crucial. Every fortified Roman camp, castrum, even a temporary one, included raised platforms at the corners and near the gates to mount ballistae quickly. From there, it could cover the entire perimeter, deterring surprise night attacks or breaking cavalry charges before they could reach the ramparts. Even in the chaos of an open battle, well-positioned batteries of ballistae could dislocate enemy formations, specifically targeting the dense units before they even reached physical contact. The ballista was not a mere mechanical curiosity. It was a physical extension of the Roman military mind. Behind its wooden and rope structure beat the cold, calculating pulse of the empire. Discipline, calculation, and silent power. What distinguished the ballista from other siege weapons of antiquity, such as the onager or the battering ram, was its absence of warning. It did not hurl heavy stones tracing a visible parabola in the sky, allowing defenders to follow their trajectory. It did not generate a deafening crash before impact. Its shot was dry, direct, brutal. The effect on the battlefield was terrifying. A single iron bolt could pass through a soldier wearing full armor, kill the horse behind him, and still wound another man in the third rank. There was no visible arc in the air, no time to react, only immediate and violent death. During the most merciless sieges of the empire, such as that of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the historian Flavius Josephus, an eyewitness, reports that the zealot defenders feared the Roman machines more than the legionaries themselves. He describes scenes of horror, bodies hurled from the walls, limbs cleanly torn off by the impact, and the cries of the wounded mingling with the dry, repetitive crack of projectiles striking stone or flesh. The ballista did not destroy only physical structures. It shattered morale and demoralized the will to resist. In the context of open battle, Roman commanders used the ballista with the mindset of a modern sniper. They targeted specifically enemy officers, standard-bearers whose fall often caused confusion, or elite cavalry. A single precise shot could change the course of an engagement. Imagine the psychological effect. A charismatic tribal leader at the front of his army, arranging his warriors, galvanizing their courage, and suddenly, without warning, a bolt passes through him from end to end, and his body falls lifeless. The impact on his troops was devastating. The enemy could lose all cohesion and its will to fight even before the first javelin was thrown. The Romans understood this invisible power perfectly. They knew that in ancient warfare, more than brute force, the perception of power was vital. The ballista was the perfect weapon to deliver this imperious message. We can kill you from far away with precision, without you even seeing it coming. Even at sea, Roman ingenuity found ways to exploit it. More compact versions, such as the Scorpion, were mounted on the prows and decks of warships. During the decisive naval battle of Actium in 31 BC, the ships of Octavian, the future Augustus, commanded by Agrippa, used this artillery extensively to shred sails, break hands, and clear the decks of the heavier ships of Mark Antony and Cleopatra before boarding. It was the perfect combination of naval maneuver and lethal precision. But every empire has its decline, and with the progressive collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the complex socio-economic and administrative structure that made possible the production and maintenance of these sophisticated machines disintegrated. Engineering schools closed, the specialized corps of ballistarii dispersed, and technical treatises like those of Vitruvius were forgotten or lost. For centuries, medieval Europe retained only weakened echoes of this technology. Siege artillery became more rudimentary again. Only the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, maintained part of this know-how, developing variants like the chirobalistra, a hand ballista, but never with the scale, standardization, or strategic impact of its imperial ancestor. However, the legacy of the ballista survived in other forms. The medieval crossbows that dominated the battlefields of the late Middle Ages inherited directly from these principles of launch and precision. The great counterweight siege engines like trebuchets, although based on gravity rather than torsion, adopted its logic of mathematical calculation and precise engineering. And centuries later, during the Renaissance, brilliant minds like Leonardo da Vinci rediscovered Vitruvius's treatises. They studied these ancient plans with fascination, awed by a machine that, more than a millennium earlier, had managed to convert war into a form of pure and deadly geometry. For the ballista, was not only one war tool among others. It was a statement of principle, a physical manifestation of Roman ideology. In it, Rome expressed its obsession with control, discipline, and the imposition of order over the natural chaos of the world. And every time one of these machines fired a straight, silent, deadly projectile, it was as if the empire itself were affirming its fundamental philosophy: the world belongs not to the strongest, but to the most precise. Yeah,